Introduce Chuck Dye. Chuck is with WildLife Ranch Solutions, which is a sister company of WildLife Partners, and he's going to talk about cold weather prep and a few other things. So, Chuck Dye.
Hey everybody, I'm Chuck Dye. I'm the operations manager for WildLife Ranch Solutions. It's just a company of WildLife Partners. So what we do is we help breeders, private breeders such as yourselves, go out and mitigate the risks that y'all encounter. So let's not be in setting up the pastures in the correct way. Let's see. So today I'm going to talk about 5 different parts of the winter preparation. First, the importance of shelter and wind protection. So, providing species-appropriate shelters tailored to your animals' needs is critical, as is having an appropriate number of shelters for the species you have. So, the shelters need to be tailored to the specific needs of the animals that you have for the most effective protection. So, species that like kind of the denser areas, and they make ranges such as bongo, nyala, they can a lot of times prefer an enclosure or partially enclosed shelter, but species like typically the larger species like greater kudu and sable prefer large, taller, 3-side shelters. Adequate shelter quantity, ensuring a sufficient number of shelters are available relative to the number of animals present. So one of the major problems we run into on a lot of our client ranches is that yes, they have a shelter, they have shelters, but they have a large amount of animals or a variety of species. There are a lot of species that won't cohabitate. In fact, most won't. Species like sable, they're kind of the dominant species in a pasture. Nothing else can get into that shelter with them. But then species like kudu, and a lot of times dama, those kind of smaller, more docile species, they don't mind sharing a shelter. A lot of times they'll kind of buddy up with another animal. Orientation is another big part of how we design these shelters. So of course, the coldest wind is going to come from the north. So we like to always, so there are species that won't use a shelter, or you might be in a situation where you have a variety of species and you just don't want to build that same number of shelters. So having windbreaks is a great addition. Windbreaks can be natural, such as cedar and live oak mott's, or artificial, like sheet metal fencing. Of course, everyone loves to just think, let's remove all the cedar on our property. But you'll see in these cold weather storms, icy, snowy, those are the areas that have no snow on them. So a lot of times animals will tuck themselves up in there, stay warm, or they'll tuck their calves up in there. In the event that you're not able to get any of these up, or you're maybe further west, so you get kind of sharp, hard winds, putting up some just old round bales is a great addition. It's small, you can put them out there pretty fast. But the main benefit of these windbreaks is, of course, blocking prevailing winds, which is going to reduce the cold stress. Some individuals across all these different species will not use a shelter for whatever reason. Whether that means they're kind of the subordinate animal in that herd, or it's just kind of a personality trait. But then there's also species like wildebeest that they want to see full 360. They don't want to be hidden, so they won't use a shelter. But they will lie up, kind of next to these windbreaks or hay bales. This reduces the risk of the cold air, kind of stressing them, kind of like Ryan talked about. Optimal shelter placement. Placing shelters south of cedar breaks or near elevation changes will aid in the heat retention for the animals, and that's obviously the primary goal here. So further west in Texas, kind of out toward the Trans-Pecos, of course there's not a whole lot of brush for any of these animals to kind of get behind. You don't want to have these shelters, and of course they're tin, stuff like that. You don't necessarily want them just in the open wind. So finding any little bit of elevation you can will be helpful. Again, there'll be some species, some individuals that won't go in that shelter. So kind of get between the shelter and that elevation will be positive. And then you want to also, when you're placing these shelters on your property, you want to make sure you have enough space between the shelter walls and any dense brush or the road. We run into that problem quite often, that during a storm when you're checking on these animals, they don't necessarily want you to be near them, of course. So we want them, in the event that they do freak out, they do kind of spook at you and run, they're not going to run off that elevation. They're not going to run into the dense brush and then potentially break one of their horns. Again, another problem with designing these shelters is effective ventilation. So maintaining airflow from these multiple directions without causing drafts to prevent respiratory issues in animals. This I'm going to talk about in a minute, but the old hay that we recommend using a lot of times can have all that dust, all that mold spores, and so these are things that these animals run into anyway, but we don't want them to ever have to just lay in it. Same kind of thing as in us. Dry bedding. We recommend using hay from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, if it's dry. When I mean dry, I mean dry. We want to make sure it's not, degraded, just turned dust, kind of just goes to dust in your hand. We don't want to make sure it doesn't have any mold in it. So again, in these winter storms, these animals are going to be laying on it. We don't need to get mold into their lungs. So of course, during winter storms, these animals sit laying in these shelters. They're not going to want to get up and move, like any of us. So making sure we're regularly replacing or adding bedding to maintain a clean, comfortable environment is, that's critical. We don't want them laying in their own poop, their own feces, urine. So, but that's not always. It's not something you need to necessarily do on a day-to-day basis. But we recommend, ideally every 7 to 10 days. The next thing we're going to talk about is facility assessment and winterization. So it's a shelter that we actually produce. So winter weather challenges: ice, snow, freezing rain, strong winds. They can all damage your shelters. Most of these species, we're going to talk about more, Ryan talked about it a minute ago, but most of these species can get cold and they can get wet, but we all suffer when we get cold and wet. So ensuring the structural integrity of your shelters, of your infrastructure is critical prior to the storms. Inspect your barns, shelters, feed stations, cracks, holes, and roofs in the walls. Even just a single leak can create moldy environment within these shelters, can create mold within your feed. So small issues with small solutions today can save you from having an emergency in the future. Ensure tight seals between the ground and the walls to keep shelters draft-free and prevent water intrusion. So it's another problem we run into quite often. A lot of times this comes with some of the pre-manufactured shelters. They don't have a great seal on the ground. So when it does rain, when it does snow, all these things, it's just going straight under, and of course that's chilling the bedding, that's chilling the animals. It doesn't matter how warm it is up at the top, heat rises. So we want to try to get as quality a seal as we can at the base of the shelters. Check for erosion around each shelter site. So of course, especially after recent rains, we've had a lot of erosion, so we want to check for that. Rats and rodents can also create flow points for water and cold air as well. That is a problem with using old hay. Animals want to get in, rats, mice, stuff like that do want to get in there and have their babies in there too, so it's another reason to clean our shelters regularly. We're putting down aggregate in shelters and feed sites is always beneficial. Whether that's helping with hoof trimming, whether that's just kind of preventing some of that water, preventing that feed and that moldy feed and that feces to build up. As it kind of degrades, it can fall down into the cracks. And then repairing leaks in the feeding stations promptly to avoid the spoilage and costly losses. Wet feed, we talk about this a lot. Wet feed is it's a parasite. Well, it's not parasite. It's a disease factory. Animals will stop using the feeder. Full stop if the feed becomes moldy, if we're not cleaning it well enough. So of course, if you're providing the feed, a high quality feed for them, we want them to consume it. And again, that leads to pests, rats, all that kind of nonsense coming, and those bring additional levels of disease. So removing hazards and managing supplemental heaters. So removing the indoor hazards. Go around, look for exposed cores, debris, sharp objects. A lot of times it's going to be that first winter, right after you build them, right after you install these shelters. There's going to be wire, there's going to be scrap tin, screws. Of course, not only can these cause issues, outwardly, cuts, bruises, all that, but it also can lead to something called Harbor disease, which is essentially a perforation of the gut. which is something that is a long-term can eventually lead to death of these animals. Remove exposed edges or screws that animals might encounter. We always have trim on all of our shelters. Yes, part of that is aesthetic, but part of that too is, as many people have mentioned, if the animal can hurt themselves on something, they will. Kind of edges between the purling and the tin, that's somewhere for our horn to get caught, or for maybe the dominant bull is swinging his head at a cow, at one of its calves, what may have you. That's one more spot, it's a sharp edge they can get cut on, and that can be an emergency, of course. Safe supplemental heater use, especially further north of here and further west of here, we do recommend heaters. There's the traditional heater that we all know that puts off infrared, or there's also heaters that can put off infrared that pose a less of a fire risk, but they can still cause a fire. So make sure we keep our heaters serviced and make sure they're installed correctly. You can see here, we have one of those, just a patio heater here. In a pinch, those will work. But if you do put those in your shelters, of course, make sure they're strapped into the walls of the structure itself, so animals jostling can't knock it over and either create a fire or injure an animal. If not installed correctly, these heaters can, of course, cause a fire. Cleaning debris and preventing storm-related damage. So we're all very familiar with recent events. This is kind of fresh in everyone's mind. But check the property for loose tree branches or debris that can fall during storms. Widowmakers did get their name for a reason. It doesn't just apply to us as humans. I've heard far too many stories where animals, a kudu they're continuing to browse their storm, branches fall, and it kills them. So if we can mitigate that by, if we notice the tree is dying or dead, either total removal or just removal of some of the more outward branches is always positive. That can also, of course, damage your shelters, and if the shelter becomes damaged, a lot of times animals will not use it or it won't be effective. To clear the debris before winter. Of course, this is something that kind of goes through everyone's mind, I gotta get to that eventually, but then things always come up and we just don't do it. But get on it now, before it's cold, before it's wet, and you don't want to be out there. Especially on your fence lines. Fallen branches, of course, it's obvious, but they can take out a fence. And one low wire, it's amazing. I've seen it happen, that impala or kudu, they know exactly that part of the fence is maybe a couple inches lower, and if pushed, they can go over that relatively easily. Protect the animal shelters. Securing shelters prevents animals from being displaced and are exposed to harsh weather conditions. So of course, again, around these shelters, we want to have them near brush, but we want to make sure they're not to where the animal can be on the periphery of the shelter and then get hit by a limb or even killed. Nutrition and water management for winter. Ryan kind of stole every bit of my thunder on this, but he did it to a much higher level. Winter energy needs. So animals require more calories in the winter to maintain body heat and survive harsh conditions. I tell people everything all the time, what you're feeding today is what is going to save your animals this winter. Do not think that you can start feeding in October, November, December, or 2 weeks prior to what you think might be a big storm, and then just flourish through it. They will not do that. You might get lucky, but what you're feeding today is what's going to help them through the winter, and what you're feeding in the winter is what's going to help them out during typical calving seasons. Animals should have to travel to feed and water from shelter, but you don't want to get too far. So everyone thinks cold, like a few years ago, we're just going to take the hay to them, we're going to take the protein to them. And that's positive. And for some animals, that's ideal. If maybe they're older and they can't get up, or you're running into some larger issues with them, sure. But we want them to get up, we want them to have to jostle around, move their gut, and keep them warm. Animals with snow or ice on their back is actually a positive, very, very positive sign. You can see this cape here, he's just got a buildup of ice. So what that means is he's not losing the excess heat that he's producing. He's well insulated. It's kind of same kind of concept as igloos. You can keep a fire going on in an igloo without melting, just well insulated. If you see, of course, eventually the ice and snow is going to melt, but in the middle of a storm, if you see ice and snow building up on them, or maybe just kind of sustaining a little bit longer, that is a positive sign. If you're seeing them become wet, then they're out there, there's a problem with their grooming. And then you need to take a closer look at them. Stockpile quality feed. This happens pretty often. We go into, we're buying feed as we need it, and that's fine. And during the summer months, spring months, especially when they're not necessarily consuming as much of your supplemental protein. But of course, when these winter storms happen, you want to make sure you're not having to rely on Ryan or any of your local feed providers to get you additional feed. You want to make sure that you have plenty of supplemental forages for them to sustain you long past the storm's end. So I like to recommend at least 2 weeks supply. Hopefully we never go back through another COVID storm like we did a few years ago, but some of us were out of power, out of water, couldn't go down the road for 10 plus days. So people who were feeding appropriately prior and had additional protein, additional feeds, those ones that did the best. Always ensure all the feeders are full prior to any weather events. Consult your nutritionist and get some testing done. Ryan talked about this too. So, and he's already covered a lot of these bases, but again, green, we walk on the ranches, green does not always mean good. Just because you see green doesn't mean, on the ground doesn't mean the kudu are happy, or it doesn't mean, just because the trees are green, it obviously does not mean, say, the sable are happy. But we also want to make sure we're giving the proper nutrition. So, proper livestock nutrition requires providing a balanced diet containing adequate energy, protein, all that great stuff. Supplementation and care. So, a lot of times, if you're not aware, you get browsers and grazers, and your browsers can feed on alfalfa year-round. It's obviously much more nutrient-dense feed forage for them, but it's also much more similar to actual browse, native browse, than it is to a grass. But of course, alfalfa is hot. It's a warm feed. It's nutrient-dense, so we want to always have supplemental alfalfa available for the animals during these cold storms. We don't want to ever just give it to them, overnight, because of course that can eat their gut up and can cause colic, can cause a lot of other gastrointestinal problems, as well as it can really just heat them up too much where they burn up from the inside. So we want to introduce that slowly for people who have a little higher end grazers. We'll start recommending supplementing that about October, November timeframe, depending on how that winter is looking. Ensuring access to unfrozen water and monitoring routines. So animals require constant access to fresh, unfrozen water to stay healthy during cold weather. So that's easier said than done though, especially no one wants to be out there in 20 degree or below temperatures. So passive solutions like a freeze miser or an electric trough heater, when possible, are game changers. Freeze miser attaches right below the actual float valve, what may have you, and I don't know the exact temperature, but I believe it's like at 31 degrees, it kicks on and it just lets little drops fall and keeps that little hole open in that trough. In larger troughs, partially filling milk jugs and placing them in the trough's edge is a great trick. So I learned that at a previous job further up in Colorado on the high plains. Putting those in there, so all you have to do, as your tanks freeze over, as your troughs freeze over, all you have to do is go and push it down, push these milk jugs down, and it opens up a whole new spot for the animals, and all they really need is enough to get their muzzles down into the water. They don't need the entire trough to be open to them, they just need to be able to get access. And a lot of the times, if it's a small enough hole, the animals will keep it open themselves. So water sources should be easy to maintain and accessible to even the smallest animals in the herd. It's another issue we run into. Everyone thinks, let's just put a trough, and if I have some amount of water, that's all it takes. And that is true, but we want to make sure that the calves can get supplemental water when they need it. Or you might have kudu in the pasture, and then a small species, say like muntjac or hog deer, something like that can't always reach all the way up to those troughs. We also want to be able to allow any calves, small animals, to be able to climb back out of those troughs as well. So that goes into the lip of every trough should be no more than ideally 8 to 10 inches off the ground. Again, we want animals to be able to get access to it but not feel like they're going to fall in. Establishing routine checks ensures water supply remains unfrozen and frees time for other tasks. water is critical, but you don't need to have it just every minute of every day. There's going to be other jobs you need to be focusing on, keeping yourself warm, checking on your animals, making sure they've got everything else they need. So during inclement weather, water sources should be checked every 4 to 6 hours. Much longer than that, and some animals within the herds may not be getting any water access. Backup water plans and monitoring animal hydration. So using manual water deliveries such as tanks or ATVs, can help ensure continuous hydration during outages. So again, this is very, very simple, but in the event that you do have maybe a total freeze or you have busted pipe, being able to just essentially hardwire these troughs with fresh new water can be the difference between survival and death for some of these animals. Insulated water troughs do help prevent freezing and ensuring the animals have access to the water in the cold weather. But we need to be monitoring the water intake closely. That goes to maybe having some game cameras on your troughs, making sure that not only all the species get to the water and get access to water, but that you don't necessarily have that all individuals within those herds and you don't have one species dominating the water. Especially as we have some of these larger, more dominant grazers, they tend to resource guard. Animal health and monitoring during winter. Veterinary checkups and preventative health measures. So everyone should have an up-to-date veterinary relationship already. There's not very many vets around, so in an event of a winter storm, you want your vet to be familiar with your operation and so they can consult you from a distance while they try to get to you. Make sure that any deworming or other preventive measures are up to date. I talked about that a little bit, but we at Ranch Solutions, we pull fecals every month on every herd on the ranch. We hardly ever get 100%, and that's not to be expected, but we want to know kind of what the fecal outlook is prior to becoming an issue. And of course, some people like to look at just the spring or just the fall. We recommend doing it year-round because these animals, they can't pick up parasites at random, and they will. So having a veterinary relationship in place prior to winter is mission critical. Talk about that. So animals with high fecal counts are more prone to hypothermia due to the lower nutrient absorption. Something I need to touch on is especially in a lot of these African species, they won't show any outward signs really of them being wormy, of them having some of these issues, because if they show weakness, well, that's who the lion's going to pick out. So they hide very well. So getting to know your animals, become familiar with them, it is very important and will help you know, okay, that animal is having issues. Now I said that, then another great thing to be looking for, being familiarized with your animals as they kind of go from their summer coats to their winter coats, is their body condition. So looking for animals with irregular patchy or rough coats. Sometimes you'll see this post-breeding. That's one thing, that'll be in a localized area. But if an animal just kind of looks disheveled, that's an issue. We want them to look fluffed up. We don't want them to look disheveled like they just rolled out of bed. If they do have that kind of hair, especially in the summertime though, that's something that needs to get addressed. Animals that are drawn up or become suddenly skinny, this goes to knowing your individual animals. They may not be getting water, they may not be getting feed, or they may just be in deep stress and they're not going to water. So knowing that and saying, okay, that animal just had a calf, she should be smaller than she has been, or that animal is bred, or what may have you, being aware of your animals is very important. Daily monitoring for illness and cabin management. Check animals daily for signs like lethargy, coughing, frostbite, or unusual behavior. Look for the patchy hair, nasal or eye discharge, animal separate from the herd. Some animals, we're all familiar, the dog will go off to die. Some of these animals will go off and kind of separate themselves, whether that's their own decision, or maybe that's the herd's decision. Wildebeest, both species of wildebeest, they are notorious for running off sick individuals. But many of these African species won't show some of these outward signs, so being familiar with their stock is critical. Some species, they will not separate themselves. They'll try to hide within the herd. And your typical beef cow does this very often. Wildebeest do this to a degree if in large enough pastures. They'll just kind of hunker their head down, look around and try to basically be as small as possible. So if you notice that one animal you can never isolate it in the front, it's just always ducking behind someone else, then maybe you need to take a closer look at that animal. Calving shelter management. Provide more, of course this goes back to providing the shelters, but we need to provide extra shelters, extra spots for these animals to go calve. The sudden drop in barometric pressure is what causes this. So, whether it doesn't necessarily matter where they are in their gestation, it can cause immediate calving. And so, that can also lead to abandonment. So the way they're checking your animals, making sure that the animals that are bred are staying bred, or if they're not, locate the calf. And then it needs to be maintained. So placing dry hay piles, again, that excess dry hay from a year or two ago, putting those in wind-protected areas near the spots that these animals commonly hang out in is positive. Having numerous areas that the moms can choose to calve or stash their offspring is ideal. A lot of times these animals will calve, and then of course they'll go and just move them onto this hay bale. But a newborn calf is wet, and so in cold conditions, they can cause sudden frostbite. Emergency supplies and stress reduction strategies. Keep all your medications, species-specific colostrum or milk replacers, first aid materials, and thawing tools ready. This is something that we don't see enough. Or maybe it's the knowledge. People don't have the correct colostrum on hand. They think they're gonna have to call their vet and figure out, okay, I've got a kudu, do I give it goat, do I give it cow's milk, what do I give it? In an emergency, any bovine origin or mixed species colostrum is better than nothing. But we want to make sure that if the calf is maybe dehydrated or hypothermic, we don't just go immediately giving it milk, especially if it's hypothermic. We want to make sure we warm them up, get them feeling good, get that suckle reflex going, and then give them the colostrum or milk. Then, so begin warming them and call your vet, call other resources, call your Ranch Solutions consultant if you're working with us. We'll advise you on kinds of signs to look for, make sure these calves aren't nearing or hypothermic. Stress reduction strategies. Maintaining a consistent routine and avoiding sudden changes in feeding or care will reduce the stress in the animals. If you're not familiar already, animals know when something is different. They know that you're looking at them differently, you're driving differently, even if you don't think you are. So continue to drive slow, use a familiar vehicle, like a feed truck. We always recommend people, corn out of your truck. Don't necessarily use corn feeders. Corn out of the truck, familiarize your animals with the sound of that vehicle, so they find this as positive, and a lot of times they'll come out of the brush to see what you got for them, which will allow you in these cold weather events to stay warm, have a better eye on them. Don't go checking just for the sake of it. Do it in a consistent manner. Even if your animals are very familiar with you, very friendly, your continued presence will stress them out. And if they're stressed out, focused on what you're doing, they won't focus on what they need to be doing. Communication and contingency planning. Emergency preparedness. So implement monitoring systems such as staff checks or game cameras to track animal welfare during these harsh weather conditions. So game cameras should be on all your feeders, all your water, and then on your shelters. You want to know what species are eating what, when are they drinking, how much are they drinking, are they utilizing shelters, are they not? That way you can mark down which animals you are seeing and those you're not. We always recommend having ear tags in at least all your females. You want to know, have I seen yellow one today? Yes, no, maybe so. And if in the event that you haven't, you now know exactly who you're going to look for. Establish a clear communication protocol and contingency plans so you can respond promptly to emergencies. Prior to the emergency, determine how you're going to handle pulling a calf, how you're going to supply it water, all these things. When I was first kind of getting into this year, that was something I thought I could figure out on the fly. We all know when you get in a rush and you're freaking out, maybe you're not able to get to your ranch. Having the supplies already premeditated, you've thought them out, you have them on site, you don't have to worry about is tractor supply open. That will help you respond and be more effective in your responses. Let your team know what you expect from them. Some people are going to have, I think that's nope. So letting your team know if you've got employees, maybe they're college students, maybe they're just part-time guys, maybe they're full-time guys, let them know, hey, we're having a winter storm next week, and let them know what you need them to do. Hey, Chuck, I need you to be here from Friday through Saturday night. Katie, maybe I need you to be here Saturday night through Sunday morning. Or hey, Chuck, I need you checking feeders. Katie, I need you checking waters. That way somebody has got eyes on and is performing all the different tasks that you need to be doing. So creating a reliable communication plan involving your neighbors, your vets, and partners like Ranch Solutions and will ensure good coordination during emergencies. Each member of your team will have different strengths. Again, some people have a more a thoughtful eye towards the animals. So maybe you have them looking at the animals and, hey, don't focus on the water, don't focus on the feed, don't focus on any of the other things. Go look at these animals and just tell me what you're seeing. Some people just maybe don't have that, and so you need them on the feed, you need them on the water. Establish prior how each team member can help. So benefit of having a good support network. That's open a dialogue with your neighbors and familiarize yourself with both yourself and them with the respective operations. We've seen it numerous times. Maybe your ranch is in Cotulla, you live in Dallas, you're not able to get down to the winter because during the winter storm, but your neighbor is. Maybe they live on site, maybe they're more local. So familiarizing yourself with them, with their operations, so you can be an asset to them, and vice versa, is mission critical, because you want them to be able to call them on the phone, talk them through what you need, and then be able to realistically go through and achieve what you need them to help achieve. Reliable partners like WildLife Ranch Solutions provide ongoing management support now and in times of need. So, of course, we've got ongoing clientele, but if you're ever in an emergency and you need help, of course, we're open for you to call us, and we're going to be there to help you. Our number one goal is overall species survival, animal survival, you all being successful. So we're never going to just ignore you because, hey, you're not one of us, you're not with us. And that's whether you've been in the industry for 60 years or 6 minutes. That's my talk. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah. And this may sound kind of foolish in this surrounding. We purchased some water.
I mean scimitar works? Scimitar? Or? Okay.
We've got about 900 acres, and we've been primarily directing everything for the white-tailed deer. When we got into New York, I kind of anticipated that they were just going to go out on the ranch, be like the deer, and survive on their own without much supervision. Have I judged this incorrectly?
Yes and no. So scimitar are an interesting species that you're inquiring about. So yes, they're a very hardy animal. They can survive on a wide range of different environments, different forages, but they're also kind of picky. They will eat your feed more than other species will. They'll hang out, but if you've got a good quality forages, good quality hay, supplemental hay, a good coastal, then they will do decently well on range, just fine. But they do need all the same management protocols in place because they can get cold. You want to make sure they have the right nutrition. They are susceptible to parasites.
So the question you're asking is precisely what WildLife Ranch Solutions does.
No.
No,
that's not my question.
Okay.
Have I misinterpreted the order on, say, 900 acres, turn around like the white-tailed deer? Lots of grass, plenty of water,
Yeah. So
and this is what's all counting.
yeah. So every ranch is different. There's not a blanket answer to the question. Is the point that I'm trying to make. If you're in LaSalle County, but let's just say, for example, you have oil and gas activity all over your property, and there's trucks coming in and out, and there's high stress, and there's fences in the middle, you can run into all sorts of problems. If you have a piece of property in LaSalle County and it's all coastal pasture and it's just really great grass, and there's plenty of, shade for the animals to get under, some research or whatever, they're gonna do just fine. If you have 100 head of cattle in there, and those cattle are consuming all of the grass, and the scimitar not getting any food, then the answer is no. So there's not a blanket answer to the question. It really comes down to your piece of property and exactly what's going on. But what it sounds like what you're asking is, the way you're describing your property, it sounds like scimitar would do just fine. They're very resilient animals. They come from the desert. I say the desert. They live in grass, but they like it hot. They do just fine. They don't need a ton of water. So barring some crazy circumstance, they probably would do just fine. In the wintertime, you might run into some other issues, which is primarily what he's talking about. It gets cold. When we went through this cold snap in 2021, there were dead animals all over the state, and it was due to a lack of preparation. It was due to a lack of management once the problems happened. You have people that have scimitar that lost horns because the cores of their horns froze. So to think that you can just take an animal, turn it out, and everything's going to be hunky-dory and fine, that might be true for a little while until it's not. Mother Nature can be very cruel. And so the idea behind what Chuck is presenting is there are steps from a preparation standpoint that make sense to think about, which I assume is why you all are here today, is to get information about how to do this correctly. It very well may be that your scimitar will do fine for 5 years, and then 1 year when we get a really bad cold snap, they won't. So it's a good idea to take some steps at least to be proactive and tailor specifically the needs to your property. I hope that answers your question.
Pretty close. This being then that someone like Chuck ought to come down and do the ranch. We had Madison down, I think it was back in January.
Okay.
But I don't think we received the kind of information that we probably need.
Chuck would be more than happy to follow up with you and help you with that.
I'll let you get back to the question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Did you have another question, ma'am?
Okay, Madison did a good job.
Okay, fantastic. I'm glad to hear that.
So she did a good job.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Yes, sir.
When building winter structures, do you have to size the structure specifically in regards to height? Do you have to size the structure specifically based on a target species, or can I build something tall enough for a kudu in hog gear use? I mean, what do you find, or is too much?
I think personally for me, when I'm designing a shelter, I'm trying to design it based on the size of the material. If it's coming in 4-foot panels, I'm going to design it from a length standpoint to maximize the use of my materials. But from a shelter standpoint, a kudu will use a structure just like a hog deer will use a structure. So I don't know that we customize structures from a species standpoint. I mean, Cape Buffalo, we have Cape Buffalo on one of our properties, and the structure is much, much, much bigger than all of the others, but it's just simply because there's a lot of them going in there. So a lot of it has to do with population as well. But we don't see a whole lot of species sharing within structures when it's cold. It does happen some, but generally it does not. So it's the more the better from just a general management perspective, giving them the option to separate by species if they want to do that. Does that answer your question? I think common sense prevails on that. You don't want a kudu having to go in a 6-foot shelter. Yeah. And but at the same time, I think if you build a shelter that's 8 feet tall with a slope to it, you're just fine. If you build it a little taller than that, it's not going to hurt anything. So Chuck can get with you on the specific dimensions of the shelters that we build, but we're not customizing a shelter for a hog deer, if that makes any sense. Any other questions before we move on? We are running a little behind. Okay, so get with Chuck if you have further questions. Wildlife Range Solutions is more than happy to help. And I'm going to wrap Chuck up with a quote from Kevin back there. So when Kevin first joined us, he gave me some great tidbits of wisdom that took a little while to sink in. But there's two sayings that he uses, and they really fit what Chuck is presenting. It's the eye of the stockman that fattens the beast, and it is the foot of the farmer that fertilizes the soil. And the moral of the story is that if you're not looking at your animals and you're not putting in the effort to take care of them, you're probably going to get a pretty poor result. But Mother Nature will get you eventually. So put your eyes on them. And if you can't do it, there are people like Chuck that will provide a service. If your manager doesn't know what to look for, people like Chuck can give some guidance and direction on exactly what to do in order to strengthen their skill set and to make them more successful. So, thank you very much. Appreciate it.